a single equation. There will be cartoons and puppies. So as Ray said, I'm the lead now of the NOAA Fisheries Open Science Initiative, but I've been, before that, this started like in October. Before that, I was a research scientist at the Northwest Fisheries Science Center. I worked mainly on endangered species work, salmon, rockfish, stellar sea lions, all kinds of things. But then starting kind of around the pandemic, started rethinking what I wanted to be working on. I've always been really involved in the open science and open source movement and community. And I decided during those times, during 2020, I wanted to really lean into that and work on that. And became involved in helping run a training program that we do called Openscapes. I'll talk a little bit about that. But then it led to me becoming, this year, much more involved in what's happening in open government, open science, open data within the federal agencies. And so what I'm going to be talking today about is going to reflect more on this more recent stuff that I've been doing. Right now, I am the NOAA Fisheries representative on something called the NOAA Public Access to Research Results Working Group. We develop a policy that's going to be coming out on public access to research results. I'll talk just a teeny bit about that. It does affect probably everybody in this room. Affects me too. I'm also a representative from NOAA on the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy Subcommittee on Open Science. That's been absolutely fascinating. It's maybe 150 representatives from all the federal agencies, people who are really passionate about open science and open data and are working across all the agencies and doing a lot of different things. It's been really interesting to me to see the insights about how policy comes to be, mandates come to be that affect us. And I was really shocked to find out how much things are related to open science are talked about within congressional subcommittees. Another interesting aside is I've been involved since 2015 in a collaboration in India, where I also do, it's basically training in statistical methods. Now I'm becoming very involved in training in geospatial remote sensing data, incorporating that into fisheries applications. I do a lot of training. I'm becoming more involved with the new PACE satellite mission that's come out, which is the biological ocean satellite mission from NASA. So I'll be involved with sort of helping us use those data too. So this is a picture. I just picked a couple outside of science picture. I actually was in it's not Bollywood, it's a film industry that's in the southeast of India. So I was in their little movie. I was their American tourist. And then I'm also a competitive kayaker. So I'm from NOAA Fisheries. So I'm in a federal agency, and that's really important for you to understand for this talk. I'm in a really big organization. I am within NOAA Fisheries. We have science centers from all over the country. We have 6 of them along the coast. We also have a very big regulatory side. These two sides are separate, but obviously they interact. So it's a big agency, thousands of people. I'm not going to talk a whole lot actually about open science. But now I'm going to go into a section where I kind of define the type of innovation that I was interested in. And then I'll talk about these ideas of how to try to get an innovation spreading through a really big organization when I am like a really small piece of this organization, and the things we did to get that going. But first, I should tell you, I want to tell you a little bit about why, what open science is and why I am interested in it. So open science it can mean a lot of different things. So this figure here is from a UNESCO report in 2021, and you can see it's got a lot of different pieces. You know, this open scientific knowledge, so open educational resources, open research data, open publications. You know, we hear a lot about that. That's I guess the really, I think if I said open science, people probably think of that top one there. But it also means open science infrastructures, so not using proprietary code, things that we use to analyze our data. We'll use open infrastructure, so it's easier to share and easier for people to use without paying really exorbitant licenses. On this other side, open dialogue with other knowledge systems. So open science tends to be pretty collaborative and collaborative across disciplines. And then finally, there's this element of engaging more with other societal actors. So like citizen science, you know, that's why you think about that if you say open science. This definition over here is what came from the White House Year of Open Science. And you can see, like for me, when I read that, I kind of think of it up at the top there, this open scientific knowledge. So it's a lot of different things. So why would I be interested, or it's not just me, as I said, I'm on a White House subcommittee for open science. So why would we care about that at a federal agency? Well, we can trace it back to the beginning of the Obama administration, and something came out called the Open Government National Action Plan. We're now on the 5th National Action Plan. And these are action plans to make government data, government processes more open and more transparent. If you've ever, say, gone onto the census website and you've seen all the data that you can download, maybe you've gone in, you're an R user, you've gone into our census. Why do you have that data? You have that data because of the Open Science National Action Plan. Those efforts to make things open, make data open, are coming from this effort. It's a very big effort. You might not see it, you might not be aware of it, but it is affecting a lot of things in the federal government. It's why all that data is open. So that's one thing. So I'm affected by that. And I am under mandates about making data open within a federal agency. There's another really big reason, it's something that's happened. I don't know if you talk about this very much in academia right now. You're definitely about to be very affected by it. In August 2022, the Nelson memo came out. This is the second public access to research results memo that came out. And what it does is it directs every federal agency with greater than 100 million annual research, so that definitely includes NOAA, to develop an implementation plan by end of this year. And that implementation plan says that all federally funded data research, so federally funded research, has to make the data underlying scientific publications publicly available at the time of publication. So there used to be an embargo, like if you got federal funding, you would have a certain amount of time before you have to make it publicly available. And now it has to be at the time of publication. So you're going to start seeing that in your grants and contracts. And if for my agency, we start seeing it, you know, and our rules is coming. We're working, I'm on the team that's working on this. So that's a really big thing that's happening. And also there's a lot more tracking. There's a lot more emphasis on these DOIs for data so they can make sure that people are actually making data publicly available. So that's a big thing that's happening. Another big thing that affects me at a federal agency is something called the reproducibility crisis in science. You can Google that. There's lots of papers about it. Yes, they made up a really good title for it. It's very clickbaity. People like to publish on that. From a regulatory side, starting about 2022, 2023, a series of data papers started coming out looking at whether you could reproduce science that was for regulatory decisions. In case you're not familiar with the reproducibility crisis in science, the basic bullet point here is it's very hard, even with the data in a paper, to reproduce the results. It may not be like, it's like, you have a completely different conclusions, but you can't actually reproduce the figures. And the number, there's a lot of metadata studies that have come out where they've tried to reproduce results. It's like 25%, maybe. That's generally what these papers show. 25% of the time you can reproduce the results. And these papers in the looking at regulatory science have come up with the same thing. So I'm at a regulatory agency, right? So that doesn't look so good. And that will definitely be affecting all of the agencies that do regulatory science. It's already hit EPA. I think it'll eventually hit the other ones. So what that has is we have more mandates about doing more reproducible science, making our code available, making our data available. That's what the implications of this is. So all these things about open science, reproducible science, and the techniques, all that's coming for us at federal agencies. There's something else, obviously, that's coming. And maybe we could kind of sort of slow drag our response to mandates. That's possible. But this other thing, this is coming. Climate change impacts are coming, and they're going to affect fisheries, and they'll affect the science that we have to do. And they're going to mean a lot more work. A lot more is going to be asked of us. Our models may stop working. Species appear in different places. The mix of species is changing. All of that is going to mean a lot more asked of our scientists, of our work that we manage. And how does that one relate to open science? Well, when you're being asked to do a lot more, but you don't have a lot more resources, what it means is that you're doing, you end up doing less with less, but you have so much more to do. And so for me, as somebody who's working in training people and talking a lot with scientists about their workflows, you really can't state how deeply inefficient many of our workflows for these massive reports that we have to write are. We have data, all kinds of heterogeneous data coming in, and it just goes through the meat grinder here. All these files, discussions. I've been on lots of these teams that make big reports. It's a meat grinder. And then what comes out the other hand, yes, you have your decision, you have your report, but if you're really honest about it, it's difficult to reproduce. It would take a lot of discussions, a lot of work to really reproduce all the things that went into it. And it's also really inefficient because it's siloed. You'll have, I'm doing an assessment, another team's doing an assessment. We don't talk together and we duplicate work. So deeply inefficient. So this is really a low-hanging fruit of how we can get more efficient and also, more reproducible, and then show people, that they can reproduce our results by not doing things this way. All right, so the good thing is we know a lot about open science workflows. We know all the tooling here that we need, so we don't have to invent things. We know how to do it. That's great. Another good thing is we've had a lot of success at training individual teams. So this is a team from the Alaska Fisheries Science Center, and they took one of our OpenScapes training, and then they put in a ton of work and they changed how the marine mammal stock assessments are done. So this is now done with Quarto and with, these R packages. They share code across the teams. They're not duplicating effort. They don't have 28 different scripts making basically the same figures. No, they have a template. So this really saves a lot of work for them. They're much more efficient, and that gives all these scientists a lot more time to do other stuff. All right, so that's great. Okay, so we know we can do it. We can do one team. But, going and training one team at a time, it's a lot of work. It's really slow. And when you're thinking about a really large organization, you want to think about, how do we get this idea to spread? How do we get diffusion of new ideas in a really big organization? And now I'm going to talk about the ideas that have been really influential to me. These are not ideas that are specific to open science. I hope that they'll get your wheels turning about any kind of ideas that maybe you are interested in and thinking about in a really in a big group or a big organization of some type. It could be a university or a population. So this gives about 2021. And we'd been doing these trainings and been very successful. And I thought, now is the time to go to upper leadership. Now, so all of this was grassroots training. And I thought we were far enough along. We can now go to leadership and start to get top-down support. And I was thinking about that, and I was asked to give a talk, and I don't know how I kind of stumbled on this. I was thinking a lot about these ideas. How do we get this idea to spread? And somebody suggested that I look at E.M. Rogers' work, Diffusion of Innovation Theory. I have not actually read the original work, but this work has been extremely influential. I didn't have to read it because there have been so many papers on this, so many different applications of this. His thinking has influenced a lot of people. And the basic idea, or what E.M. Rogers did, is he went out and he looked at a lot of different types of innovations, all kinds of innovations, and found that it goes through predictable stages, and it goes through the population in personality types. So the idea first comes in with the innovators. And that first idea, it doesn't just sort of like go in the population, sort of rising up, about across the whole population, all personality types. Now, that's not what happens. It starts out with the innovators. And the first people who see that new idea are these early adopters. It's like, wow, a new idea. They're really attracted to that. And then after that, it goes into this group called the early majority. And they have a different personality type. But they're open to new ideas. And then only after it gets through those two groups, then it starts going into your late majority. I'm going to talk about these different personalities, because that's really important to understand what these people are like. And hopefully you'll kind of recognize some of these personality types from your own life. So the early adopters, they get really excited about new ideas, so excited they can't really stop themselves from just getting sucked in. They're like, they hear it and they're like, whoa, that is so cool. And then you don't hear from them for 2 days because they couldn't stop themselves from trying to figure out how to get it to work and how to create it. They're the ones they find some new tech toy, they want to show you it, they just can't stop talking about it. They also tend to have big visions, like, whoa, can you imagine how this would change everything? It's some new idea, it's really small, but they just see like, wow. And they're just so excited, like really, energetic. I do a lot of like workshops and hack weeks, and you could always see these people. You can feel their energy and their inability to just keep away from a new idea. And you can hear it in their voice also, kind of like how I'm talking right now. I am definitely of that type myself. The next group is the early majority. I'm going to describe the early majority in the context of an organization. So in the context of an organization, the early majority will tend to be your leadership. Your early adopters, these people do not tend to end up in leadership, even as they get older. They simply don't have the personality type that would lead them into leadership. So the leadership people, so the early majority, so the next one who are going to take up this new idea, they are risk averse. So they're just not going to go trying everything. They're not going to go down rabbit holes. These people will more likely be your, not your senior leadership, but they are leaders. They are like maybe leading projects, or you know, maybe they're you know, state the second or third tier leadership. They're very pragmatic. They want to see that the idea works and has value, and then they're willing to try it out. They'll do like a pilot and give it a go. They're also price sensitive. So they want to see, yeah, hey, is this really going to save us money? I do not want to have all my staff going and wasting their time on some new ideas. But they're definitely open to new technology. An interesting thing, though, is they do see technology as a tool that is going to help them steer their organization or achieve their organization missions. Your early adopters are fascinated by the tool. It's a little bit different. The next group is your the late majority. Your top level leadership often will fall into this group. So generally resistant to change. You know, they have a lot on their shoulders. It is their responsibility to successfully manage a very large organization. A lot of people depend on them. And so the fact that they're resistant to change should make sense. They're definitely risk averse, price sensitive, definitely want to see a lot of really good numbers. And they're probably not going to listen to your early adopters. They will be listening to the early majority and seeing if the early majority has had some successful pilots, if the early majority thinks it's a good idea. So those are your three main groups that are going to be involved as an idea is starting to, you know, innovate, spread, and then move into the bulk of the majority. Notice I'm not going to talk about really the laggards here. So, you know, your people who just really are resistant to taking up new ideas altogether, because even though like when I've talked about new ideas, people always bring up, oh, well, that person, oh, what about them? They'll never want to learn new things. Well, yeah, so what? They're not really relevant to diffusion of innovation. So I really don't need to be thinking about that group. All right, so, you know, back in 2021, and we're thinking, is it time to approach the early majority? And I did a lot of reading about how companies will, you know, work on spreading ideas and innovation in companies. And one thing that came out is this emphasis on reaching your early adopters in your organization, because it's their energy and effort that's going to drive that initial diffusion process. The uptake of a new idea, it's not like you just like, hey, here's a new idea. And then it's like, oh, great, wow, it solves everything. It doesn't work like that with new ideas. They are very energy and effort intensive. That effort to turn a new idea into something that you can actually use, it takes relentless effort. And so it's those early adopters who get absolutely just wrapped up in it, sucked into it, and their energy is crucial. And so the number there, like 13 to 15%, that's kind of the rough number from the various studies of how many people are in this personality type. So keep in mind, it's a personality type. It's not somebody who's already doing the innovation. It's the personality type that's likely to get like really invested in these new ideas. And so what happened for us is, you know, I sat back and I thought, wow, have we really reached out to all the open science, the people at NOAA Fisheries who would be likely to adopt open science, and realized no. There's a kind of an interesting thing about early adopters, that they're hard to reach. They tend to be isolated. It's a rare personality type. And so every so often you'll have a few together. Oh, and if they're together with other early adopters, oh, they're very, very happy. They all feed off each other and they do things really quickly. You've probably seen groups like this. But a lot of times they're solo and they're the only one in a group. And it's very common if they are solo in a group that they are shackled because their project leader does not find their tendency to go down rabbit holes very productive. And so they tend to be highly controlled. They'll often be highly controlled. This behavior of loving innovation, wanting to do new things, is not considered a good feature often. And so they can be really pretty depressed until they can find other people like them or get themselves in a different situation where they're not being so controlled, and their natural tendency to like invent things and work really deeply on things is not being discouraged. So what happened for us in like 2018 is that we had no way to reach our early adopter innovators across NOAA Fisheries. So I'm here over at NOAA Fisheries. I had literally no way to communicate with people who might be interested in open science. So I was particularly interested in R. So I was a deep R programmer. I've done a lot of R packages. I do a lot of R training. I had no way to reach other R users in the agency. None, absolutely none. It's literally impossible for me to send out or get a broadcast email to another science center. With a bit of work, at least I could talk to the communication people at my own center, maybe get out a message, but absolutely not could I get messages out to other centers. So that was a problem. Like, how do you reach those people if there's no way to communicate? So that became very clear that early on, that to reach those early adopters, there had to have mechanisms for communication. And what happened was I began teaching these R workshops, and I made it open to all. And how did I do it? I forget. It was word of mouth. Yeah, it was word of mouth. I started to say, hey, invite everybody to this. And people started coming. And through that, I started collecting emails. And then we did some more training. And we started to do these OpenScapes, and we started to get connections. So our training was OpenScapes were across all our science centers. And so we started to get the connections. And that beginning started an email list that allowed us to begin communicating with each other. And once we started communicating, then the ideas begin spreading, and they start spreading quickly. So now we have a very robust R user group, and then we also have a Python user group. And that list is really important for getting out ideas. The other thing on like trainings and just efforts, the other thing is we stopped working siloing. So there were 3 or 4 big groups that were all doing kind of open science adjacent stuff. We started working together. So this was this really key idea, the importance of communication channels and figuring out how to make it happen. And we did it just with these grassroots efforts. At that point, that is when we went to the leadership at NOAA Fisheries. And so now that's why, like, I have this position. I'm paid by headquarters full time. We'll be rolling out a really big training program starting for the next 3 years. So there's a lot of stuff happening, but that only happened after we got our early adopter group really well developed. Okay, but it wasn't quite that simple, because, you know, in this step right here, from this early majority to the from the early adopter to majority, most innovation fails here. So another really pivotal idea in innovation theory, diffusion of innovation, is this book called Crossing the Chasm. It's actually a marketing book, but it's again deeply influential in the field of innovation. And it explains that, you know, that this diagram here, you know, it looks like it just like nicely goes from one to the other, showing that no, there's a huge chasm. And over here you have, you know, your early adopters, rainbows and unicorns, and they got to get over here and they just can't get across. And in this book, he explains why that happens, why most innovation dies and cannot cross the chasm and get into the majority. So I'm going to explain this with a little parable. about the evolution of sheepdogs. This has nothing to do with the evolution of sheepdogs. It's just a silly little story to try to explain these ideas and explain why it's so hard to get across that chasm. So let's start with your innovator. So the innovator has this ability to make phenomenal leaps of imagination. So it sees, he or she sees wolves hunting, killing the elk, and can imagine, wow, that could be herding sheep and doing something productive. So it's like, wow, this idea that's just like, how'd they even think of that? And another thing about the innovator is the difficulty and the novelty of this new idea fascinates them. They're fascinated by the wolf. The wolf is so cool. They really like that. But you know, the innovator, they're really important. They see the idea, they come up with the idea, but they are not suited to turning that vision into reality because they tend to be really fascinated by the wolf. And they are not worried or bothered at all by the complete impracticality of the wolf. Like you can't train them, you know, and they will have a tendency to kill the sheep, right? Now that doesn't bother them. You know, hey, look, that new cell phone you came up with, you know, it's that big. That's okay, but it's cool, right? Okay, so that's really typical. Like they're actually kind of the things that they're so difficult, they're so impractical, that actually fascinates them. So instead, you need, what we need is something, not the wolf. We need this idea to turn into something more practical, and honestly kind of boring. And for this is where the visionaries or the early adopters come in. So these are the ones who have this ability and relentless drive to take that idea and make something workable and useful. They have many of the same qualities of like an artist. You know, somebody who has a vision of like that sculpture. I can see it in my eye and I must make it come out. These people have that same drive, but it's more kind of towards the engineering side. They see that idea and in their mind, they see what it could be and they cannot stop until they have created that thing or at least made a working pilot. It's impossible for them to stop. That's how they get sucked into these rabbit holes. So, that group's really important. But let's think about what's the next group. Where is this sheepdog going? Well, this sheepdog's going into a sheep herder market. So we're going to have these sheepdogs with the sheep. So here we can maybe see the problem. We have the people who invented our sheepdogs over here. They love sheeps. I mean, they love dogs. They really love them. They love them a lot. And they love training them too. Oh, it's so much fun. And they are going to, so they did the work, and now they're going to try to convince this next group that they should like this idea. And this next group, they love sheep. Yeah. So now we have these sorts of conversations happening. The visionary who's trying now we're in the selling part. We're trying to sell our idea, right? So here's our visionary. It's like, well, you know, okay, I get it. It's a puppy. And yeah, I know it does need training, but you know, hey, look, come on. Think about where I started. I started with a wolf. And so this problem here, you know, they don't really get that talking about wolves is not going to be a selling point to the sheep herders. This is a metaphor, but these similar sorts of things happen for other ideas all the time. The second one is they are like, just train the puppy like I did. It's fun. Our programming is fun. R is really fun. You know, you don't think it's fun because you haven't done it. If you did it, you would think it was fun. So they're really, yeah, they love that puppy. The early majority, they're like, I raise sheep. I do not care about puppies. Your early majority, your early adopters die a little bit right now. And next, I do not want to train puppies. So now they are depressed and they probably kind of dislike the sheep herders. They do not have respect for them. So this is not going to work when you're trying to sell your idea. These two people, like they really, yeah, that's a problem. The other thing is that, you know, as much as your early adopters try to hide the fact that they maybe think, sheep are boring and not as fun as puppies, they can't really hide that. And the early majority is kind of dubious about taking sheep raising advice from dog lovers. And, hey, sheep raising is $1 million business. And so maybe, these people who are really obsessive about like dogs maybe don't have a lot to offer to them. So they're dubious. So there's another kind of interesting thing that also happens that makes it really hard for your early adopters to be very good salespeople. And that's that they don't see the puppy. It is integral to their ability to be an early adopter that they do not see the puppy. They see the thing that they want to be. And it is the fact that they see that and they can't unsee it produces that drive to create this thing. So imagine that person who comes into, like, you're buying a house and you're doing a fixer up, they walk in like, oh, and it's a dump, right? Wow, that's amazing. Look at all this, what it could be. They see what the house could be. And so they can put that effort in. Somebody else who just sees, whoa, it's a dump. They can't even get started. And so this is like this really intrinsic part of the personality of the visionary. And you can tell, when they talk, you can see, if you know that this is part of their personality, you kind of hear the way they're talking about things. You're like, well, you're kind of talking about the finished product. You're like, well, we're not quite there. It's like, yeah, but all you need to do is, it's always this, it's those words. All you need to do is, because they don't see the puppy. But the person, the group they're selling it to, they definitely see the puppy. And they're like, that needs a lot of work before I can actually use it. All right, so what does that mean? That means that your early adopters are pretty bad salespeople. And in the history of like innovation of ideas, oftentimes companies fail at this point because their early adopters, the people who actually got the idea going, the company tries to use them as the salespeople and it just doesn't work. And so, yeah. Most like great new ideas, new companies, coming up with something cool, they don't make it across the chasm and they die. So with that in mind, like, how do you get across the chasm? And there are two main ways. These are talked about in this book, Crossing the Chasm. One is a very charismatic communicator, somebody with deep connections to this sheep herder group, but also understands the innovation. They can relate to the early adopters. Problem with this, and there are lots of fantastic examples about this. Many of our, the big companies you think of, like that are very, innovative, they will have this charismatic communicator. But it's kind of hard to just go out and say, oh, hey, I need to get myself a charismatic communicator. These are rare people. So, and like, how do you just come up with a plan to find them? So that's actually not, that's kind of a rare way to do it. And the more common way is that you carefully choose a single market for your idea. So this idea could do a lot of different things. You're not going to do everything. You're going to pick one thing and you're going to be disciplined and you're going to put one thing and you're going to put all your effort there. You're going to make a sort of a, advance party into the early majority. And it needs to be a problem so painful and pressing that the early majority is willing to take some risk and try something new. The bad thing is it's probably not a splashy or exciting problem. And the early adopter team is going to have to let go of the big vision. So what did this mean for us? And this is kind of hitting us 2022. So in 2022 and 2023, when we were making the move into making the case for doing a really big training program in open science, which we'll be starting in the next few months for the next 3 years, we focused on big government reports. Yeah, not splashy, but really big time savings. The staff savings time can be quantified. And also the staff were eager to automate because it is soul crushing work. these huge gray literature reports, I mean, they're soul crushing. The science staff involved with that, they were eager to put in the work to get away from that. So that was like our, single painful problem. We really focused on that. And then once we made it in there, now we're kind of spreading out a bit more and tackling some other things. Last two slides here. So this is where we are going forward. We have this open science group, and this is involves a bunch of different of our groups that are involved in different ways with open data, open source, open access. We all kind of work and collaborate together, try to, not try to solve problems like maybe we need a certain type of infrastructure. Rather than us individually going to leadership, we work together. And then secondly, we have the NIMS OpenScapes with this big training program where we bring people together to learn open science and reproducible science skills. All right, with that, thank you. All right.
What do you do about confidential data in this process? I mean,
Yep.
Observer data.
Yeah. So there is a carve out for any types of data that could not be made public. So there's a carve out for confidential data, other, like health data. If you, yeah.
So what fraction of the data that you've dealt with would fall into that category?
For me personally, because for my work on endangered species, not much. I would say where it comes up for me is when we're using data that's by the tribes, collected by the tribes. So that would be an example. I will say also, even for like, if you're writing a paper that's using confidential fishing data, so no, you couldn't make the raw data public, but you would be required to make the sort of, amalgamated or average data. Yeah.
Eli, that's great. It's so different from like a lot of other talks that I've seen. I'm curious if the big government reports that have to be done every year, they're mundane, they're painful, are the low-hanging fruit. What's the big vision that you'd like to see this get to in like 10 or 20 years in terms of like scientists adopting open science?
So much more collaboration, and in terms of like right now, like I think, if I think about like our code that we write or the scripts that we're writing for, analyses that we're doing, so much of that right now is just like on people's laptops. And for me, in a federal agency, we are going towards making much more of that open. So there's a big push right now to get a lot more things up into GitHub. That's what we are leaning into. We have us and a number of other federal agencies are leaning into GitHub Enterprise to create like an inner source for us. We can also make our code public in that, but we can, particularly for us, we can make all our code internally visible so that and that's kind of like this idea of like getting those connections, those networks happening, the communication happening, and then the whole kind of organism of scientific work starts to change as the simple act of making things visible, findable, reproducible, starts to change. So I want you to imagine if every talk that you went to, it had a little QR code, and you could go to that and find the code exactly to do what they did. So if you thought, oh man, that's cool, how'd they analyze that data? How'd they do that? You just go there and you could immediately grab that script. You could run the analysis yourself, but more importantly, you see exactly how they did it. You didn't have to read the paper and then spend weeks and weeks, like, how do I code that? How do I do that? What exact URL did they use? That's kind of my vision of, I think science would be really different if that starts to become the norm. So that's one thing. My other big vision, so I'm going in my personal research and also training that I'm doing in the organization. I am working a lot more in the field of big data geoscience. So all this data from our satellites or remote sensing data for the ocean, for land, is going into the cloud, and it's much more easy to access. And within like other fields, so I don't see this right now yet in fisheries, but definitely if I go into a cryosphere, so study of the ice sheets and ice and snow, they are leaning much more into that and sharing like the notebooks and the scripts, how to access that. And so their students, their grad students, can do a lot more with remote sensing data than what I see within, compared to like a fisheries students. And so I would like to see, or hope to see definitely, in the next 10 years, that in fisheries, we're much more like, what we would see if we went over to oceanography, or if we went to the UW Geosciences department and in their facility of working with all this tremendous data that's coming on the oceans. I mentioned the PACE satellite, that's phytoplankton, aerosol, clouds, and ocean ecosystem. That is going to bring much more fine scale information about the ocean. It's going to be really exciting to see what people can do with that. One barrier to that is still like the computational side. And I work a lot also in this idea of open infrastructure to make it easier for people to just drop in and start using this big data and not have to like worry about how to set everything up, set up all the modules or all the programming and everything you need to install. So that was kind of a,
Thank you.
yeah.
So kind of a follow-up question, what is the future of open science to the public? Like, I think that I've seen a lot of like data visualization, shiny apps, things like that are being used outside of, us scientists, and actually are kind of communicating really complex data. So what's the future of, kind of expanding this framework, thinking about that particular puzzle piece?
Okay, can you say the question again right at the beginning so I can
Yeah.
and make sure I'm answering it?
Yeah, just to be, I guess, a little more concise. What's the future of open science in kind of beyond just scientists, but open science to the public, like in kind of synthesizing complex information?
Yeah. So, people are experimenting with a lot of different things. And this is, I'll tell you my opinion. I feel like I see a lot of things where we try to, like, we help people visualize things, visualize data. But I feel like there's still like this barrier in like helping people create things. And I think also that we underestimate the ability of people. Like, I think that we kind of feel like, oh, wow, for somebody to be able to program something or, create something scientific, they need a scientific training. And I'm not willing to make that assumption. In fact, I don't really care in a way. I really believe in this idea. Make your teaching and your training open. So like I run a YouTube channel for data science, and I just share like how to do all kinds of nerdy things. And it's amazing, like, I don't know, people can teach themselves all kinds of things. I love this time that we are in, like in sort of this era of like individuals creating things. I love like all like the creative stuff, like, you know, the Instagram reels, you know, the TikTok. I don't go on TikTok because I'd never get any work done, but I love that element of creation. The fact that we have given people's tools and let their creativity go wild, and we didn't put any constraints. There are no barriers to who can do that. And I would love it if it were like that more with science and more with the kinds of things I do with programming. And that's kind of getting this like open infrastructure. And there's a group of us who like are playing with these ideas. How do we make it so someone can go to a website, they click on a button, and bam, you are there in this Python environment. You just go wild, make what you want. So, yeah.
From a institutional perspective, this is all super impressive and amazing, and I think great the direction things need to move towards. But for folks that aren't a part of that institution, what's the incentive for participating if by participating they lose potential leverage in their I'm thinking like if I build a workflow or model or scripts that are open source, and then the government has it, what need do they have for hiring me or contracting out to me when they can just run it themselves, or train some AI on GitHub to produce code that does similar stuff?
I think that I think the people's value is not the code that they produce. Like that's like I think, you know, when I write a paper, well, I've already written the paper and it's out there, so, you know, darn, I'm done. Well, no, I'm not done. I write the next paper. And so same, like now you don't have to be focused on things that you've created, and you can create something new. And actually, you don't even have to make this idea perfect in order for it to become perfect. You got the pilot out there, and you put it out there, and you said, take it, run with it. You'll still get credit. You're not like saying, oh, hey, use my thing and don't, you know, give me credit for this idea. You still get credit for that. But now you've created something and you've made it easy for somebody else to do it, use it, and they can create new things. And so you are getting this sort of viral thing going, but you're still there. You're credited. You're like, I would say you're getting more out of it. You're making the value of your data or your source code or whatever by making it open. Like if you track like reusability, you could see the impacts of these ideas, that they would be more influential.
Okay, let's take one more question.
You seem fairly certain in saying that early adopters don't get into leadership positions. Why do you suppose that is? And I'm also curious, you said you group yourself into it, but you're a NOAA chief, right?
Oh, I wouldn't say I'm in leadership. No, I'm not. I'm not in leadership. I am at headquarters, but I've been detail for 3 years. But no, I definitely am not. I would not put myself in leadership. Not like of a organization. Like I'm not going to appear on the org chart of the leadership of NOAA Fisheries. And I would say, like, even if you like made it to like senior scientist, So those people, like that's where your early adopters would be, so they would be advising things, but that's different than leadership. So I think that there's a few reasons why it's uncommon for early adopters to go into leadership. One is the personality thing. So to lead, to have the responsibility to lead a large organization, that's a lot of responsibility. You do need to be cautious. Getting sucked down into a rabbit hole and not being able to answer your email for 2 days, those are not qualities that make you a good leader. And so you're just kind of going against your personality a bit. So it would be very hard for someone who's a really strong early adopter personality. The other thing, and I think it's kind of another interesting thing about early adopters, is that their motivations are often kind of different in that they may not be motivated or really care about normal sorts of kind of gold stars. Like yeah, they care about money in that they do, you have responsibilities, you gotta, pay the rent, buy food, support your family. But they may not really care all that much about salaries or promotions. And they find it hard to care about those things. Moving up the rank would typically be hard for them to care about. They are driven by this desire to create something. If they've created a tool and other people will use it, that's great. I will also note that within like an academic setting, these people may not be people who publish the most papers. Again, they can be driven by creating tools. They may make a whole bunch of packages, Python R packages. They make tools that are like a new, I don't know, gadget or something, and they make that. But actually bringing things all the way to completion with like, a publication or a grant or something, that they can do that, but it may be a little bit against type there because they get so wrapped up in the creation part.
Okay, I think we can carry on the discussions
Yeah.
over a few drinks. And Eli, thanks very much. It was
Yeah.
very-